The air inside Matthias Holloway's workshop smelled of brass, oil, and the faint ghost of candle smoke. Shadows flickered along the wooden walls, dancing in time with the gentle ticking of dozens of clocks, their hands sweeping forward in quiet unison. Time was a living thing here, breathing through the steady metronome of Matthias' life's work. For nearly 50 years, he had devoted himself to the delicate art of horology, crafting timepieces so precise they whispered rather than ticked, their mechanisms infused with an almost preternatural smoothness. He had built clocks for kings, bankers, and scholars, each one a testament to his unmatched skill. Yet, at the dusk of his life, he found himself working on what he knew would be his last masterpiece. The commission had arrived on a night of peculiar silence, carried by a stranger dressed in garments so black they seemed to drink the candlelight. The man's face had been gaunt, his eyes deep-set and watchful beneath the brim of a tall hat. "I require a clock," the man had said, his voice cool and deliberate. He placed a small velvet pouch upon the workbench. It spilled open with the weight of gold coins, their glint catching the flickering light. One like no other. Matthias, who had long since stopped being impressed by wealth, only glanced at the payment before asking, "And what makes this clock unlike the others?" The man's lips had curled into something that might have been a smile, though there was no warmth in it. "It must not only mark time but command it." The words had hung in the air like a spell, sending a curious chill down Matthias' spine. "That is a dangerous notion," he had murmured. "Time is not ours to wield. Yet you will build it." It had not been a question, nor a demand, but something stranger, an inevitability, spoken as if the gears of fate had already begun turning. And despite the unease curling at the edges of his mind, Matthias had accepted. Now, weeks later, his fingers trembled as he adjusted the final gear within the timepiece's intricate heart. The clock itself was an unassuming thing, its case carved of dark walnut, its face a delicate circle of silver with Roman numerals etched so fine they could be mistaken for shadows. And yet, something in its craftsmanship felt unnatural. As he tightened the last screw, a peculiar sensation prickled at the back of his neck. The air in the workshop grew dense, heavy, as though the very fabric of time had begun to warp. Matthias exhaled slowly, forcing himself to dismiss such foolish thoughts. "It's only a clock," he whispered. But as he lifted the timepiece to admire his work, the minute hand twitched, not forward, but backward. A mere fraction of an inch, but enough to freeze Matthias where he stood. And then he heard it. A voice, distant yet clear, emanating not from the room but from the clock itself. Tick, tock. The sound sent an unnatural shiver through him, the weight of an unseen presence settling into his bones. Matthias Holloway, master clockmaker, had built many timepieces in his lifetime, but this was the first that had spoken back. Matthias Holloway stepped back, his breath shallow. The clock sat before him, innocuous in appearance yet humming with an unseen energy. He had crafted countless timepieces, each one precise, elegant, and predictable. But this was something else. The voice had been unmistakable, a whisper, low and deliberate, slithering from the depths of the clock's delicate mechanics. And yet, as he stood there, watching the slender hands resume their steady forward march, he wondered if his mind had simply betrayed him. His fingers hovered above the polished silver face. Tick, tock. There it was again. Matthias recoiled, knocking over a small vial of oil that clattered against the workbench. He turned sharply, his eyes darting to the corners of the dimly lit workshop, searching for some logical explanation. The clocks lining the shelves carried on as they always had, their rhythmic ticking undisturbed. But this one felt alive. Swallowing hard, he pressed a cautious ear to the wooden case, listening. Nothing. No whispers. No voices. Just the soft, mechanical heartbeat of gears turning in perfect harmony. He let out a slow breath, rubbing his temples. It was late, and he was old. Perhaps exhaustion had conjured ghosts where there were none. Yet, something in him resisted that explanation. His mentor, the late Master Brantley, had always said that timekeeping was more than a craft. It was a conversation with the universe, a way of imposing order upon the chaos of existence. But perhaps, Matthias thought now, there were some conversations better left unheard. He straightened his posture and forced himself to focus. There was still work to be done. The commission was nearly complete, but before he could present the clock to its mysterious owner, he had to ensure its function was flawless. With steady hands, he wound the key, feeling the smooth resistance of the tension building within the mainspring. As the gears locked into place, he watched the second hand glide with unnatural precision. It was exquisite, perfect, and then it stopped. Matthias frowned. He leaned in, inspecting the gears, searching for a fault in the mechanism. His fingers moved to adjust the delicate cogs when, without warning, the minute hand jerked backward. 1 minute. 2. 3. He yanked his hands away. The pendulum swayed in defiance of logic, its rhythm reversing itself with eerie smoothness. The clock was undoing time. Matthias stumbled back, his breath ragged. His workshop had always been a sanctuary, a place where time was measured and controlled. Now, it felt like a trap. And then, the air shifted. The candle flames flickered, casting elongated shadows that twisted unnaturally along the walls. Matthias' heartbeat pounded against his ribs as a whisper brushed past his ear, not from the clock, but from the empty space beside him. "I am waiting." The voice was neither kind nor cruel. It simply was. Matthias spun around, but there was no one there. Only the relentless ticking of the clocks that lined his walls, their rhythmic chorus suddenly feeling oppressive, suffocating. His gaze returned to the timepiece, now eerily still. Whatever he had created, it was no longer his to command. And somewhere in the unseen depths of time, something had begun to stir. Matthias Holloway did not sleep that night. He sat hunched over his workbench, his eyes locked on the clock, his fingers trembling slightly as he reached for the winding key once more. The whisper had faded, but its presence lingered, like a shadow just beyond the edge of his vision. He had built this clock with his own hands, but he no longer understood it. As dawn bled through the warped glass of his workshop window, Matthias gathered his resolve. He had to test the mechanism again, to prove, if only to himself, that what he had seen was nothing more than the hallucination of an exhausted mind. He wound the clock. The gears sighed into motion, the second hand gliding forward with its perfect, precise rhythm. 5 seconds. 10. Matthias exhaled. 15. 20. A strange warmth crawled up his spine. 30. 35. The minute hand shuddered. And then, with the softest click, the world lurched. Matthias' breath hitched in his throat. The air in the workshop thickened, as if the very fabric of reality had tightened around him. He turned toward the window instinctively, looking for an anchor to steady himself, but something was wrong. The sun, no longer a timid glow on the horizon, now hung higher in the sky, golden rays spilling over the rooftops of Holloway Lane. The morning mist had burned away, leaving behind crisp daylight. Had he lost time? Matthias staggered to his feet, eyes darting between the window and the infernal clock. He had just wound it. It had been mere moments. And yet, his gaze caught something odd among the clutter of his workbench. A candle stub, its wax melted into a frozen river over the wooden surface. But he had lit that candle only an hour ago. Had it burned down in seconds? No. Impossible. He turned sharply to the grandfather clock in the corner, the one that had stood sentry over his workshop for 3 decades. Its face stared back at him with an unforgiving truth. An hour had passed. But he had not lived it. Matthias reached out, pressing a shaking hand to the cold surface of his masterpiece. His fingers trailed the carved wooden frame, searching for something, anything, to explain what had happened. The whisper returned. Not from behind him. Not from the corners of the workshop. From within the clock. You cannot reclaim what has been taken. Matthias stumbled back, his heel catching the leg of his stool. He crashed to the floor, the breath torn from his lungs. His pulse pounded against his temples, his body cold with the realization that slithered into his mind like a serpent. This was no ordinary timepiece. It did not merely track time. It devoured it. He had built something unnatural. Something that obeyed no earthly principle of gears and springs. This was no longer a machine. It was an instrument of something greater, something terrible. A soft knock at the door made him flinch. Matthias swallowed hard, his throat dry as dust. He pushed himself to his feet, his limbs aching from the weight of fear pressing against them. He hesitated, glancing at the clock one last time. It sat motionless, its hands frozen as if it had never moved at all. The knock came again. With a deep breath, Matthias forced his trembling fingers around the doorknob and pulled it open. A familiar figure stood on the threshold. The man in black. His expression was unchanged, his eyes as hollow and watchful as the night he first arrived. But now, there was something else in his gaze. Something knowing. "It is ready," the man said. Matthias' heart pounded. He had built many clocks in his lifetime, but never before had he been afraid to finish one. Matthias Holloway stood in the doorway, his fingers tightening around the brass knob as though the pressure could ground him, tether him to a reality that had begun to slip. The man in black did not move. He merely watched, his deep-set eyes flicking past Matthias, settling unmistakably on the clock. "It is ready," the man repeated, his voice smooth as oil, cool as a midnight wind. Matthias' throat constricted. He should have been relieved. The contract had been fulfilled. His work was done. And yet, the thought of handing over this timepiece, this thing, sent a wave of unease coursing through him. He turned slightly, casting a wary glance back at the clock on his workbench. It looked ordinary, unassuming in its polished walnut case, its silver hands motionless. But Matthias knew the truth. He had not built a simple mechanism. He had built something that took. And it had already taken from him. An hour, vanished. Stolen. Devoured. Matthias swallowed hard, turning back to the man in black. "Who are you?" The man's lips curled ever so slightly. Not a smile, not truly. More the shadow of one. "You already know." Matthias shook his head. "No, I don't." The man in black exhaled, stepping forward. The morning light did not seem to touch him. The edges of his form remained draped in twilight, as though he carried the night with him. "You are a craftsman," he said. "A man who has spent his life mastering time. But time is not meant to be mastered." His gaze flicked to the clock again. "And yet, you have done what few have achieved. You have built something beyond mere gears and springs. Something that does not mark time, but bends it." Matthias felt his blood turn cold. "It isn't natural," he whispered. "No," the man agreed. "It is not." A silence stretched between them, thick and heavy. Then, the man stepped forward again, reaching out his gloved hand. "It belongs to me now." Matthias' jaw tightened. He had known this moment would come. He had built the clock for this man, this strange, unknowable figure who had appeared on his doorstep one moonless night with a request that defied reason. And yet, something within him resisted. He thought of the hour he had lost. Would he ever get it back? Or was it gone forever, consumed by the very thing he had created? "What does it do?" Matthias asked. His voice was low, wary. The man tilted his head. "You already know that, too." Matthias did. But he needed to hear it. The man's fingers hovered over the timepiece, but he did not take it, not yet. "This clock does not simply measure time," he said. "It does not simply count the seconds, the minutes, the hours. It collects them." His eyes flicked up, locking onto Matthias' own. "Time is a current, a river that never stops flowing. But your creation, it is a dam. And once the dam is built, the river must find another way." Matthias felt a chill slither down his spine. "And where does it go?" The man's smile did not reach his eyes. "Where all lost things go." Matthias' pulse thundered in his ears. He had built clocks for kings, scholars, collectors. He had prided himself on his precision, on his craftsmanship. But he had never questioned why people needed their timepieces so desperately. Never asked what if. Now, he was beginning to understand. The lost hour, his lost hour, wasn't simply gone. It had gone somewhere. And if this clock could take time from one place, could it be given to another? Matthias looked at the man in black, at the shadowed weight of his presence. Who was this for? His stomach twisted. "I won't give it to you," Matthias said suddenly, his own voice surprising him. The man in black did not blink. "You misunderstand," he said softly. "You already have." A cold gust of wind swept through the workshop, rattling the tools, snuffing the candle flames. And when Matthias looked down, his hands were empty. The clock was gone. Matthias Holloway staggered backward, his breath shallow, his hands trembling. The workbench was empty. The clock, the infernal timepiece he had crafted with his own hands, was gone. He hadn't given it away. He hadn't moved. And yet, It had vanished as if it had never existed at all. The man in black stood motionless, watching Matthias with an expression of quiet inevitability, as though he had known this would happen all along. Matthias' throat felt tight. "What did you do?" The man in black tilted his head slightly, his dark eyes unreadable. What was already decided? A deep, uneasy silence settled over the workshop. The ticking of the other clocks, once a soothing presence, now felt like a suffocating chorus. Each tick a reminder that time was slipping through his fingers, that something had been taken from him. The lost hour, the missing timepiece, and something else. Something he couldn't name. Matthias' mind reeled. He had built that clock with his own hands. He had measured every gear, carved every tooth, aligned each mechanism with a precision honed over a lifetime. But now it was gone. And worse still, he could not remember when. He tried to recall the moment it had disappeared, but his thoughts felt clouded, blurred, as if someone had taken a knife and sliced out a fragment of time itself. He had been standing there, speaking to the man in black, and then, his hands clenched into fists. The missing hour. The same force that had stolen time from his day had stolen the clock from his world. Matthias' breath came shallow and fast. Where is it? The man in black exhaled, as if amused by the question. It is where it was always meant to be. Matthias shook his head. That's not an answer. No, the man agreed. But it is the truth. A muscle in Matthias' jaw twitched. His heart pounded against his ribs, the weight of an unknown loss pressing down on him. He was not a foolish man. He had spent his life shaping time into something orderly, something measurable. But this was beyond him. Beyond reason. Beyond logic. He stepped forward, his voice tight with urgency. What have I built? The man in black did not answer immediately. He turned, moving toward the door with the same measured grace he had arrived with. But before stepping over the threshold, he paused. Matthias' breath caught in his throat. You built a key, the man said, glancing over his shoulder. His expression was unreadable, but his voice carried the weight of something ancient. And a door. A key. A door. Matthias' pulse quickened. He had thought he was building a clock, an instrument to track time, to master it. But if this stranger was to be believed, it was something else entirely. Something far more dangerous. The man in black stepped outside, into the fading morning mist. But before he disappeared, he left Matthias with one final whisper. You have already stepped through. And then, he was gone. Matthias stood frozen, the air thick with silence. He turned to his workshop, to the empty space where the clock had once Saturday. And suddenly, the ticking of the other clocks sounded wrong. Because for the first time in his life, Matthias Holloway did not know what time it was. Not in the way he always had. Not anymore. Matthias Holloway sat in his workshop long after the man in black had vanished. The air felt heavier, as if the very walls of the room had absorbed the presence of something unnatural, something beyond understanding. The other clocks in the workshop ticked on, oblivious to the silence pressing against Matthias' chest. But something had shifted. Something was missing. Not just the clock. Not just the lost hour. Something deeper. He rubbed his temples, trying to grasp the shape of the absence, but his thoughts felt fragmented, disjointed, as though part of his own memory had been pulled from him, stretched thin across the gears of a machine that no longer existed in his world. He reached for his pocket watch, flipping it open with a practiced motion. The hands pointed to 2:17. He glanced at the grandfather clock in the corner. 2:17. The wall clock near the door. 2:17. Everything was in sync. But it felt wrong. Matthias rose to his feet, his limbs stiff with unease. He moved through his workshop, touching the familiar objects as though reassuring himself that he still existed within this moment. The chisels, the brass gears, the unfinished commissions from patrons he had nearly forgotten about. He turned toward the door, his fingers hesitating on the knob. Outside, the world continued as it always had. The morning mist had burned away, revealing the narrow cobbled streets of Holloway Lane, where shopkeepers arranged their wares and carriage wheels rattled against stone. But something inside Matthias resisted stepping out. The man in black's words echoed in his mind. You have already stepped through. A chill ran down his spine. Had he? He inhaled sharply and forced himself to step outside. The sunlight was bright, yet it cast no warmth on his skin. The street smelled of fresh bread from the baker's shop, of damp wood and burning coal from the blacksmith's forge. Normal. Familiar. And yet, Matthias' eyes landed on a woman walking briskly past the apothecary. Something about her seemed wrong. Not her face, not her clothing, but the way she moved. As though she were retracing a step she had already taken. His pulse quickened. He turned his gaze to the lamplighter at the corner, trimming the wick of an unlit lantern. A simple, unremarkable movement. But then, as Matthias watched, the man reached for the wick again, an identical motion, as if he had never done it the first time. A cold sensation tightened around Matthias' chest. The street was repeating itself. The woman passed the apothecary again. The lamplighter adjusted the wick again. Matthias swallowed hard. Had he witnessed this before? Or was the world itself caught in some imperceptible loop? He turned sharply, his feet moving faster than his mind. He needed to confirm something, needed to know if this was real or if his mind was unraveling. He crossed the street toward the clock tower at the town square, ignoring the startled glances as he hurried past. The massive timepiece loomed above, its brass hands gleaming in the morning sun. And then, his breath caught. 9:46. Matthias' blood ran cold. It was impossible. His pocket watch had read 2:17 just moments ago. The clocks in his workshop had agreed. But here, the town's great timepiece declared something else entirely. The world had lost more than an hour. The missing time, it wasn't just his. It wasn't just 1 hour. Time itself had been fractured. Matthias staggered backward, the sound of ticking filling his ears. Not just from the tower. Not just from his mind. But from something else. Something unseen. And somewhere, just beyond the veil of what he understood, the stolen hours whispered in the dark. Matthias Holloway stood beneath the looming face of the town clock, his breath uneven, his mind drowning in the impossible truth before him. Time was broken. The hands of the great clock read 9:46, yet his pocket watch still whispered 2:17. The people around him moved in loops, small, subtle repetitions that no one else seemed to notice. The woman passing the apothecary. The lamplighter adjusting the wick. Over and over, trapped in an unseen rhythm. The lost hour had not simply disappeared. It had shattered. A slow realization settled over Matthias. His creation, his final timepiece, had done this. The clock he had built did not merely measure time. It consumed it, bent it, fed something with it. And now, it had been taken. By the man in black. Matthias clenched his fists. If time had fractured, then there must be a way to mend it. And he was the only one who understood how. His feet carried him forward, past the oblivious townsfolk, past the marketplace where merchants haggled over the same deals again and again. He walked with purpose, though he did not yet know where he was going. Until he saw it. A narrow alleyway that shouldn't have been there. It cut between two buildings that, for as long as he had lived in this town, had never been separate. And yet, the alley waited, dark, impossibly still, stretching beyond what the eye could follow. Matthias exhaled sharply. A door. I built a key, and a door. He stepped inside. The moment he did, the world behind him vanished. Matthias walked through a corridor that was not made of brick or wood, but of time itself. The walls shimmered, pulsing with unseen energy. The air hummed with the ticking of 1,000 unseen clocks. And at the end of the passage, waiting in the cold glow of a suspended hour, stood the man in black. The missing timepiece sat in his hands. Matthias' heart pounded. Give it back. The man in black smiled, as if amused. You misunderstand, Clockmaker. It was never yours to keep. Matthias took another step forward. You said I built a key. A door. But I didn't know what I was creating. His voice was steady now, burning with a certainty that had evaded him before. Tell me what this clock really is. The man's dark eyes gleamed. This is not a timepiece, Matthias. He lifted the clock slightly, admiring it like an artist beholding a masterpiece. It is a vessel. A cage. Matthias' breath caught. A cage for what? The man in black smile faded. For time itself. The word sent ice through Matthias' veins. "You have spent your life measuring time," the man continued, "trying to control it, to master it. But time does not belong to men. It is not meant to be hoarded. It is not meant to be tamed." He turned the clock in his hands, and Matthias felt it, the shifting weight of something vast and unseen, something ancient pressed between the gears. "You built a prison," the man whispered. "And now, time is trying to escape." Matthias staggered back. The broken moments, the missing hours, the fragments of time slipping from the world. It wasn't vanishing. It was fighting back. The man in black stepped closer, holding out the timepiece. "You have a choice, Clockmaker." His voice was softer now, almost reverent. "Seal it. Complete the work. And time will belong to you. To keep. To command." Matthias' breath hitched. The idea was intoxicating. A world where time bent to his will. A world where he decided what was lost, what was gained. But then he saw it. In the polished silver reflection of the clock's face, his own hands, old, worn, looked blurred. Not like hands at all. Like shadows. His pulse thundered. The man in black had never asked for the clock to be built. He had asked for it to be finished. Because only Matthias could complete it. And in doing so, he would not own time. He would become its prisoner. Matthias Holloway, the master of time, would be trapped inside his final timepiece, forever. He met the man's gaze. And then, with a single breath, Matthias shattered the clock against the ground. The moment the glass broke, time rushed back in. A roaring wind howled through the corridor, the unseen forces of 1,000 stolen moments flooding back into the world. The walls of time trembled, the unseen ticking turned into a deafening roar, and Matthias felt himself being pulled. But before the world swallowed him, he saw the man in black one last time. He was smiling. Not in anger, not in rage, but in approval. And then, everything went dark. Matthias Holloway woke to the familiar scent of oil and wood shavings. His workbench was before him, untouched. His tools lay neatly where he had left them. The clocks ticked softly around the room, their steady rhythm a comforting hum. His heart pounded as he turned toward the workbench. The timepiece was gone. Not shattered. Not broken. Just never there at all. As if it had never been built. Matthias exhaled, his hand steady for the first time in days. He had been given a choice. And he had chosen to set time free. Outside, the town bustled as usual. The morning sun stretched over the rooftops, warm and real. The people moved naturally. No more loops, no more vanishing hours. Matthias reached into his pocket and pulled out his watch. The hands moved forward. Exactly as they should. He let out a slow breath. And yet, as he turned back into his workshop, something nagged at the edge of his thoughts. A flicker of memory, of whispers in the dark, of a corridor made of time. And for the briefest moment, in the corner of the room, he thought he saw a shadow shift. A tall figure. Watching. Then, gone. Matthias Holloway smiled to himself. Perhaps time would always have its watchers. But he was no longer one of them. He picked up his tools, steady hands ready for another day's work. The clocks ticked on, and the world moved forward, as it was always meant to. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit that like button and leave a comment below. I love hearing your thoughts. If you're craving more mysteries, thrillers, and spine-chilling tales, make sure to subscribe and ring the bell, so you never miss out on the next chapter. The darkness is always waiting, and the next story could be just around the corner. See you in the next one, if you dare.